Tonight on Greater Boston, two former Massachusetts Soldiers Home officials who say they were fired for flagging lingering safety concerns after a COVID outbreak in Holyoke killed 76 veterans. Then later, look at some of the everyday Ukrainians standing up to Putin's forces with the author of What Makes a Hero, Elizabeth Svoboda. And finally, an unexpected window into the war, a Hyde Park high schooler and the Kyiv teenager she's tutoring in English. When 76 veterans died in a COVID outbreak at the Holyoke Soldiers Home nearly 2 years ago, the Baker administration vowed swift action to get to the bottom of what went wrong and to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. The Attorney General's office also launched an investigation, ultimately filed criminal charges against the then Superintendent Bennett Walsh and then Medical Director Dr. David Clinton, which have since been dismissed, but the AG's office is appealing. A report from an outside attorney selected by the governor's office also detailed numerous decisions by Walsh that were, quote, utterly baffling from an infection control perspective, including consolidating units, little to no distancing between symptomatic and asymptomatic residents, a failure to quickly isolate suspected COVID patients, testing delays, and more. And several lawsuits have been filed, including one in federal court on behalf of dozens of workers at the home, claiming inhumane conditions caused by management's poor decision-making, and another class action suit that named State Health Secretary Mary Lou Sutters as a defendant, claiming she long ignored serious leadership problems at the Soldiers Home. But now we're learning the problems may have continued even longer than many had thought. As the Boston Globe's Andrea Estes first reported last week, a top official who was brought in after the deaths to identify and fix issues at the Holyoke Soldiers Home, Eric Sheehan, says he was fired just days after flagging ongoing concerns with the State Inspector General's office. And he's not the only one. Beth Scheffler, who Sheehan recruited as acting chief nursing officer at the Soldiers Home in Chelsea, says she too was fired shortly after filing a complaint with the IG's office. Now they've both filed a joint whistleblower complaint with the Attorney General. Eric Sheehan and Beth Scheffler join me now, along with their attorney, Andrew Couture. We've also reached out to the Inspector General's office, which has not responded as of this taping, and the AG's office, which referred us to the Office of Health and Human Services, which sent us a transcript of Governor Baker's appearance with Marjorie Egan and me on Boston Public Radio, which we'll hear a piece of in a few minutes. Eric, Beth, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Eric, starting with you, when you took over at Holyoke, what conditions did you see that troubled you?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having us
Sure.
again. Back in December of 2020, I was asked by the administration to be the assistant secretary with the oversight of both homes. And I identified pretty quickly that there was a number of health and safety concerns that I was identifying.
Like what?
So many of them were around the CMS requirements for infection control and how patient movement would work within a long-term care facility. More specifically, for example, when a patient came back from an outpatient hospital or an appointment outside of the facility.
And you believe they posed health risks to the patients. Is that a fair statement?
Significant health risks. Our responsibility was to ensure we were following CMS and CDC and DPH guidelines for a reason, because health experts had identified those protocols as extremely important to follow to reduce spread.
Eric, could you report those concerns to?
Originally, I had made sure I had made the Holyoke administration aware with my findings. When it seemed like nothing was being done, I had notified my boss, who was Secretary Cheryl Poppy, and for the most part, my concerns were ignored. And then in the spring of 2021, I had sent them up to Mary Lou Sutters, who's the secretary for the executive office.
What response did you get from Mary Lou Sutters?
I did not get a response back from Mary Lou Sutters at all.
What response did you get from the Secretary of Veterans Services, Poppy?
Essentially, I was told that the superintendents do not report to me. It's not my responsibility, and that I should continue to work with them if there is any issues, in which I had reiterated a number of health and safety concerns.
Eric, one last thing for now. You took a medical leave, I believe, in the midst of your service there. Why?
So yes, I was diagnosed last spring with post-traumatic stress disorder and severe depression from the long year of running the Chelsea Soldiers Home, where I was the deputy superintendent and acting superintendent, and finally took its toll after working 15, 20-hour days for about 11 months and being on site. So as a veteran myself, seeing fellow veterans die was traumatic for me and finally caught up to me.
Beth, you experienced some conditions that made you uncomfortable as well. What were they?
Yes. Well, I myself never went over personally to the Holyoke facility, but what I can tell you is that in the summer of 2021, after everyone was being told that the Holyoke facility was following CMS, CDC, and DPH guidelines for in response to the pandemic to try and prevent the spread of COVID-19, I attended meetings by Zoom where the Holyoke leadership, representatives from the Department of Veteran Services, the Chief of Staff, their attorneys, and senior leadership, the medical director, senior leadership at Chelsea. And the nature of that call, that whole meeting was about trying to comparing what Chelsea was doing to Holyoke, because we were hyper vigilant about updating our policies and procedures and re-educating staff, et cetera, throughout the pandemic. And what was glaring was that Holyoke, even in late June or early July of 2021, hadn't implemented basic procedures consistent with CDC, CMS, or DPH guidelines. They would discuss, those included how to manage visitors, how to manage personal protective equipment, how to manage testing of residents and staff, how to cohort and isolate. Those things at that level, I mean, we're talking, 18 months after the pandemic starts, 15 months after the pandemic starts, and all those deaths, they were still trying to iron that out.
Beth, what kind of reaction on those Zoom calls was given by the officials to whom these conditions were being reported?
Well, initially, I will be honest with you, initially I misunderstood and thought that they were trying, that Chelsea was being asked to do something different than what we had been doing, and had been quite successful. But what the lawyer for the Department of Veteran Services piped in and said, actually, we're trying to get Holyoke to be in alignment with Chelsea. That was the reaction, because I got rather concerned and heated, I'll just be honest with you, during that call. It concerned me that 15 months later, we're still having these conversations.
Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but your clients ended up filing whistleblower claims with the Inspector General's office because they weren't getting satisfaction in response to their concerns. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, Jim.
And they believe that as a result of the filing of those whistleblower claims, they were fired shortly thereafter. Is that correct as well?
It seemed to be the case as after the initial interviews with the Inspector General. In fact, I believe Beth was fired a day or two after, or maybe even the same day.
The day of
her concluding her IG's interview, and Eric was maybe about a week after his Inspector General.
Andrew, I want to play for you. We asked, as I mentioned a minute ago, and this was the transcript of this was sent to us by the Executive Office of Human Services. Governor Baker was with us on the radio last week, and Marjorie Egan and I asked him about the whistleblower claims and if he knew anything about them prior to the story in the Boston Globe. Here's what the governor had to say.
First I heard of it was when I saw the story. And there is a process for fact-finding on these allegations, which we will collaborate and cooperate with. And the Holyoke story is one that I'm sure the people involved in that will never go over, and neither will I.
He went on to say that the governor went on to say that he reached out to roughly 100 family members, spoke to about 80, and that he believed he took remedial action immediately. Andrew, do you have any evidence that the governor, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Sutters, or the Secretary of Veterans Services, Poppy, actually knew about the filing of these Inspector General claims, or is it the coincidence in time that caused you to reach that conclusion?
It is definitely the coincidence in time. There's no direct evidence, but to see Beth fired the date of the concluding of her Inspector General interview, there's a lot to be said on that one, especially Eric as well. He was on FMLA, with
Family and medical leave, yeah.
So he was on FMLA status when he got a call, and they fired him while under FMLA status, which is a violation of that statute as well. And when you start talking about, whether or not, Governor Baker knew or who knew about it was either what they should have known. They should have known the problems. Instead, they ignored the problems and even reported during the height of COVID, we got this all under control, but in reality, they really didn't.
I want to get back to you, Eric, for a second. The Secretary of Veterans Services, when firing you, said, this was in the Globe, lost confidence in your ability. Your poor judgment had been discussed with you. Had it been discussed with you? What were your prior reviews like?
Never was discussed with me. In fact, my latest review, which was either February or March of 2021, I can't remember exactly when I received it. My review was exceptional. And when I went out on FMLA, my boss, Cheryl Poppy, never once called me or had any conversations with me. So there was never, ever a conversation. We've never had those conversations other than the fact I continued to do a stellar job for the homes, and my expertise was valued.
Beth, had you had any prior problems in terms of your performance reviews prior to this fire?
No, sir. I had almost more than 2 decades of public service for the Commonwealth, and I actually won accommodations and awards during my tenure as a public health employee. Department of Public Health employee. I have never had a poor evaluation. My evaluations have been exceptional. I've never received a warning. I've never been put on a performance improvement plan. In fact, no one at Chelsea even told me there was a concern or issue at all until the Monday I went in and they said they no longer wanted me there.
Well, Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, I also think I read in the Globe account that you'd been asked to become the permanent chief nursing officer. Is that not correct?
They couldn't technically offer it to me officially until the person who was occupying the space, the position, who had been out on leave for a long time, officially vacated it. But I was told repeatedly that the intent was to have me transition into that role permanently, and that occurred just days before. I heard that from the Chelsea Soldiers Home attorney and the medical director, who had a conversation with the superintendent, and I had a conversation with the superintendent.
Understood.
There never was any indication that there would be a concern.
Eric, last thing from me for you. I know you're not a mind reader, but why would the administration, from Baker to Sutters to Poppy, why would they not want to fix the things that you identified as problems at the home, particularly after 76 veterans lost their lives there?
I think, Jim, that's the big question that we all need answered. As a veteran myself, it's deplorable. I always had a responsibility since the day I took an oath in 1998 going to Paris Island that I'd always take care of my fellow brethren, and that goes to today. So I don't know. And I put my heart and soul into my job, and I continue to do it until that they did not want my services.
Andrew Couture, I only have a couple of seconds left. What are you looking for? What's the relief that your clients are seeking in these whistleblower claims?
Well, my clients are seeking, first of all, specific performance. We want to see the Soldiers Home get to where they're supposed to be. First off, that's primary. I mean, this is not just for Eric or for Beth. This is to fix a problem within the Soldiers' Homes, both in Chelsea and in Holyoke.
What else?
We are seeking, compensation for time that both of them lost. In addition, I think it's important to note that Eric also has a workers' comp claim currently pending against the Commonwealth due to the issues that arose during his service to the Commonwealth, and of course the Commonwealth has completely ignored any kind of request for any kind of workers' comp benefit.
Before you go, I said Eric was the last question, but talking to Andrew, it just occurred to me, I know you're not at the home anymore. Do you have any reason to believe that the conditions that concern you continue to exist, or do you not know?
So to answer your question, yes. I have a lot of former staff members and colleagues that trust me to this day and still reach out to tell me that things are still pretty bad at both homes.
Eric Sheehan, Beth Scheffler, Andrew Couture, thank you all three for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. Earlier today, Joe Biden announced another major move aimed at forcing Putin's hand to end his war on Ukraine.
We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. This is a step that we're taking to inflict further pain on Putin, but there will be cost as well here in the United States. Americans have rallied to support the Ukrainian people and made it clear we will not be part of subsidizing Putin's war.
A war in which Putin's forces have killed hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians and forced at least 2 million people to flee their country, according to the UN. But many have stayed. And I'm not one to throw the word hero around lightly, but it's hard to imagine anyone more deserving than the many Ukrainians who've gone from a completely normal life to risking everything to defend their country, showing relentless courage in the face of overwhelming force. Ordinary heroes, as my next guest called them in a recent terrific Boston Globe piece, writing that they up the ante for the rest of us. When heroes are indeed just like us, the question, why not us, becomes exceedingly hard to answer. The woman behind that piece, Elizabeth Svoboda, joins me now. She's the author of What Makes a Hero, The Surprising Science of Selflessness. Elizabeth, great op-ed. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Thanks. You know, hero is arguably the most overused word in the English language, but not in these circumstances. Tell the story of Vitaly Shakun, who you mentioned at the top of your op-ed in the Boston Globe.
Yes, absolutely. So Vitaly Shakun, he was an engineer in a Ukrainian battalion, and his higher-ups had decided that there was this one bridge, the Henechesk Road Bridge, that needed to be blown up in order to stop the advance of the Russian tanks. And Shakun volunteered for that job, and he was going to have to put mines there to blow up the bridge. And he knew that in the process of doing this, it was incredibly risky. And unfortunately, he did end up losing his life in the process of blowing up the bridge. But as he wanted, he was able to slow down the Russian advance. So talk about putting yourself on the line for a larger cause.
Well, and also we've seen stories of hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of Ukrainians who are like Vitaly Shakun. Are you surprised by what you see in the Ukrainians, or based upon your research, is it predictable that they rise like they did here?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I would say it's entirely predictable, but what we do know from the study of heroes is that most heroes are actually very ordinary people in terms of personality, often in terms of their occupation. They're not that different from the rest of us. They don't fit some superhero or set apart type of prototype. So in that sense, I think it's not surprising that when everything really is on the line, that when they are defending their countries and their families, that they step up. And some of them have been hailed on social media, millions of others will not, but they step up and get the most out of themselves and are the most selfless that they've ever been in their lives.
You know, you've written books, you've researched this. I haven't done any research. It's just sort of my gut reaction. It's one thing for me to see someone who reacts heroically without thinking like that guy years ago, the Vietnam veteran who jumped on top of somebody who had fallen into the subway tracks in New York City. Wesley Autry was his name. Covered the person with his body as the subway rode over them. It's another thing. These Ukrainians, it's not purely reaction. They think, and then they decide consciously to take risks, which is incredible to me. Is this genetic, or is it learned, or somewhere on the spectrum? What is it?
I think it's definitely a combination, but I would say I err on the side of this is behavior that can be trained and it can be learned oftentimes. And when we look at heroes, in their childhoods, they often have had very selfless role models, people that they have looked up to that shape their worldview. And I think you really have to have a worldview that is inclusive, that when you look at other humans, you see other people who are just as deserving and just as worthy of saving as yourself. And so it gives you that mindset that I'm going to put myself on the line for somebody else.
Well, if I can take that one step further, my sense of things was if you earlier in your life have been helped yourself when you were suffering in some fashion, you're more likely to help others. Is that borne out by the research or no?
Yes, I think to some extent the research on that topic is still pretty early, but it has been borne out that when you go through something difficult and there's somebody who helps you come out of that the other side, that you are more likely to be motivated to want to help somebody else who's in really similar dire straits. And researchers actually call that altruism born of suffering. So it's actually this idea that by going through the hard times, what you learn from that, you are motivated to pass that on to somebody else. And that can be a really incredible effect.
You know, the thing that's really stayed with me from your op-ed, a number of things did, is you talk about when someone who is larger than life is heroic, it doesn't have as much an impact on you because it's sort of an arm's length kind of relationship, for lack of a better expression. But you go on to say when an ordinary person, like a Ukrainian, like a professor we saw on CNN, a retired professor who was building Molotov cocktails in her backyard for her neighbors to throw at the Russians, that kind of heroism from ordinary people is contagious. Is there evidence of that connection?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the science on heroism is early, but just in terms of social contagion, we do know that when somebody sets a moral example, and especially when you look at that moral example and you are impressed, and you kind of resolve over time to follow that can actually create behavioral changes. So the way I look at it with these Ukrainian heroes is they really are inspiring people and creating sort of this moral ripple effect that we don't even know where the end of that's going to be. And that is incredible.
Do ordinary people who become heroes or engage in heroic behavior, do they see themselves as heroes? I'm guessing they don't.
Almost universally, they don't. You're right. The ones that I've talked to, overwhelmingly, the message I get over and over again is, I just did what I felt like was the right thing to do in this situation. And I did what I hope somebody else might do for me if I were in that terrible situation. And so it's really about being able to take the perspective of somebody that's in trouble, to act when there's a principle that's under attack. I think that's what really makes the difference.
And does the doer, it seems to me when you do a good act, even if it doesn't rise to the level anywhere near these Ukrainian individuals, you also feel better about yourself. I mean, there is a spillover onto you, is there not?
Yes, absolutely. And I think over time, even when you make these small decisions like, okay, I'm going to speak up for somebody at work that's being bullied, or okay, I'm going to call out this corrupt practice that's happening at work, that when you sort of practice in these small ways, that helps form your moral identity. And even down the line, it prepares you if you ever are in a situation where you need to step up in a really big heroic way, you're going to be more ready to do that. So I think it can be the snowball
Elizabeth,
effect.
I only have 30 seconds left. In addition to the contagious impact on me or Jane Doe as an individual, can the contagion affect a whole culture, as it seems to me it is affecting, for example, people in the United States, red, blue, and in between? Does that happen?
I think absolutely it is happening. It's happening within Ukraine. The ordinary heroism of individual Ukrainians is influencing others, driving more acts of heroism. And certainly there's a spillover effect into the US too. We are seeing more unity in our culture to a level that we haven't seen for quite some time. And that has been incredible.
Elizabeth Svoboda, your research and your writing is fascinating. And thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
One Boston high schooler has been hearing stories like these firsthand through an unlikely venue, an online tutoring program that she started out as her effort to help teach English to a teenager in Kyiv. Liz Nislos has the story.
Images from war-torn Ukraine, said to be taken by local students who until recently were focused on learning English through a nonprofit, Eng In. The group connects students to English-speaking peers around the world.
Hi, Danilo.
Hey,
How are you doing right now? I know it's crazy over there.
yeah, I'm fine actually. I'm in my hometown.
More than 4,000 miles away in Hyde Park, Boston, Stacy Francois is one of those peers. The 17-year-old Boston Latin Academy senior connected months ago with Danilo, a 19-year-old medical student who lives not far from Kyiv with his family. He'd hoped to improve his conversational English. It's now practice with the vocabulary of wartime.
We just attacked some Russian propaganda news, so people cannot access that false information about what's happening in Ukraine. And also we just make fire bombs and or you just call this Molotov cocktail.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
that's
bottle
it. We
with
just
like the fire. And all that.
water. We have bottle with some petrol.
I can't imagine my friends and I going together and creating Molotov cocktails. I could never think of that type of thing happening.
As I told you, so our country has been at war for 8 years already. So I thought about, a possibility that I might be involved in this war and that I might carry a gun, but it was like a possibility. But now it's a reality.
The tutor is getting some eye-opening lessons.
It's crazy thinking about the situation and the differences between the experiences that we're having. Like,
And it's really scary, to be honest, because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I really appreciate your support, to be honest. So yeah.
Now Stacy emails every few days to check on Danilo.
it didn't end up as us speaking about these issues in the world and becoming more than just teacher and student, but more friends and companions.
I have to go to bed for now, I suppose.
All right.
Yeah, because if the siren starts, just this, I have to go to the shelter, and then I will have not enough sleep, and then I will be angry.
Thank you for meeting with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to me. And thank you for being curious about what's happening here. So hope to see you next time. Hope I will survive this night and everything will be all right. We have no other option, only to win. So see you.
All right.
Liz Nislos, GBH News.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye. See ya.
The program has more than 4,600 students in Ukraine and 120 volunteer tutors in Massachusetts, but most lessons are now suspended. Organizers say many of its students are traumatized and busy just surviving. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe.